And so for you to manifest, you have to build up in prayer. Because there is a place you pray to where there are coals of fire. That's where your tongue will be touched. And if your tongue is touched, it will be purged. When you come back, you can become a prophet.
There to step down the atmosphere a bit, to be able to share with us a few thoughts before we begin to pray. We realize that we are in a strategic season in the progression of the operation of the Spirit of God. When you study the patterns of the operations of God with humankind from scriptures, you would realize that not every season are the same. There are certain moments in the Spirit that are Kairos moments. And if you miss those moments, everything you would have done in a longer season might just be a waste. And when we look upon scriptures and we see that these patterns repeat themselves from time to time, it becomes important for us to become sensitive. And so one of the things I realized in studying the scriptures is the fact that discernment is one of the greatest heritage of a generation. A generation that is without discernment is a generation that is about to waste divine investments. Because there are many things we can do in God, given the obvious fact that we have a lot of potentials. But what informs the strategic things that we should do in the kingdom is born out of our discernment of what God is doing in our generation and in our time. All the things we do in the kingdom are very important, but not everything we do is expedient. It is discernment that informs us what we ought to do by time. So the Bible spoke of the sons of Issachar in 1 Chronicles chapter 12 verse 32. It said they were men that understood the times and the seasons. Everybody in the clan was part and parcel of all God promised. They were all qualified for the heritage of God, but not all of them knew what they ought to do for the season. Only the sons of Issachar, by the powers of discernment, understood and knew exactly what Israel ought to do in a season. And it was on the strength of the ministry of the sons of Issachar that Israel was able to maximize the potentials of God that were weaved into different strategic seasons. Your zeal is not enough. Even your general knowledge about God is not enough. It's possible for a man to understand the ways of God, yet fail out of what God is doing in the season. But when we begin to understand the protocols that are required for us to maximize seasons, then sensitivity becomes one of our greatest compass of navigation. A lot are not aware what God is doing in this season. This is what informs careless living. This is what informs lack of right priorities. This is what informs lack of burdens. They believe any day, anytime they show up, things can still work out. I'm sorry to inform you that spirits don't operate that way. It took God 700 years to prepare the Israelites for the coming of the Messiah. The prophet Isaiah prophesied it. He gave a narrative of everything that will happen in the season of his appearance. All the indicators were rendered by prophetic intelligence. But when that season came, the whole generation lacked discernment. There were many people that were committed to the studying of the Torah. In fact, they came up with a sect called the Sanhedrin, doctors of the law, that studied the ways of God and understood the writings of Moses. But when the Messiah came, he was walking the street, they could not recognize him. They called him a carpenter. They were praying, they were fasting, hoping for the coming of the Messiah, but discernment was lacking. In a whole generation, only 3 people were aware of what God was doing. The number can be that small. This is why when God wants to unveil a new season, He raises men to raise alarms, so that many lions and lionesses can be awoken to what God is doing in that season and enter into the fullness of their ordination. So John in his generation cried from the wilderness. And when John roared in the wilderness, the people that had that kind of burden to be relevant in that season, they heard him and they recognized his voice. And Jesus himself, when he showed up, he went to John to receive validation from the ministry of John, because he was the only accurate man in the world. Before I begin tonight, I want us to pray for discernment, because the journey is far. I want to share something this evening that if you are not discerning, it may not make sense to you. I'm telling you the truth. If you are not discerning, it will not make sense to you. You will not know why many people live the life of sacrifice, and their lives, if it were in their day and time, made no sense. It is because of what they saw. It's because of what they knew. It's because of their understanding of the move of God and the role they had to play in the move of God in their generation. Where you are seated, just bow and tell God to open your eyes to see and to hear beyond what I will say. Beyond everything, I will communicate that God will furnish you with discernment tonight. Because if you hear what I'm saying from the depth where it will be uttered, your way will change, your lifestyle will change. A whole lot of things will be altered and turned around in your life. Knowledge itself will not profit you enough unless you are discerning. Because you may know a lot of things, you will not know what is strategic for the season. Ask the Lord for a discerning heart tonight. I'm deliberately stepping down so that we can really pay attention to hear these things, because these things are not about this meeting. They are things we will carry from this meeting and practice every day of our lives. If we must count, if we must be relevant in our generation and even in eternity, we cannot afford to live like the world. The civilization of this world cannot define our reality. We must be different. Not different because we want to create impression, but different because there is something breaking upon us from another dimension. And the powers of that which breaks upon us is beyond our will. We can't resist it, we can't fight it. It alters our very motivation, and it informs our emotions, the way we think, the way we act, the way we respond to circumstances. Go ahead and pray. Go ahead and pray. In the last 5 minutes, I will begin to fly. But these things must be communicated in its most simplistic fashion, so that the least among us can understand it and walk with it.
And so for you to manifest, you have to build up in prayer. Because there is a place you pray to where there are coals of fire. That's where your tongue will be touched. And if your tongue is touched, it will be purged. When you come back, you can become a prophet.